Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 199th edition of the TNT Show, The Nation Talks. And tonight, the nation is talking to Paul Kavanagh, and you really don't want to miss this. But let's just talk a little bit before we talk to Paul about the fact that this again has been another great day for British democracy. I bring you the following news straight from the UK government website. It says, if you're travelling over Easter weekend, watch out. Important changes to personal imports. You can no longer bring meat or dairy products from the EU countries into Great Britain for personal use. This includes beef, pork, lamb, mutton, venison, and goat meat, and all dairy products like cheese, butter, or yogurt. So, if you have a packet of Lurpak about your person, you cannot bring that into the UK. Yeah, isn't that just a wonderful advert for British democracy? Here we are at a point in history where the US president is introducing all sorts of tariffs, and they're questionable in many respects. They're probably self-defeating also in some respects. And the UK is voluntarily aiding them in this process by introducing all sorts of strange and frankly bizarre restrictions on the freedom of people to bring some cheese in from EU countries. I mean, it's just nuts. I mean, a whole bunch of you will be sitting there thinking, he's making this up. I wish I were. But candidly, that's what the case is. Well, let me tell you something, it's even more troublesome. According to the news tonight, 62% of chief executives in the United States will expect a recession in 6 months. Now, many of these folks are fans of Donald Trump. Many of these folks have actually given him money, sizable amounts of money. We're talking millions, absolutely crazy. And they're looking at a recession in 6 months. That means, of course, that they're planning for a recession. Now, you don't have, I expect, like many of us, the privilege of planning to make yourself more resilient in terms of a recession. They do, and I suspect they're busy exercising that choice as we speak. There'll be teams and teams of executives looking to some way, shape, or form reduce the effect of this recession. But that's a privilege they have, which most of us don't. Furthermore, listen to this. Trump, who said these tariffs would be good for everyone, particularly Americans. That's what he sold it on. He's now saying that he's considering a bailout for farmers. This makes a lot of sense because, guess what happens at this time of the year? Farmers plant things. It's spring after all. They plant things. If the things you're planting have a tariff on them, right, the likely outcome in some months' time when they come to fruit or fruition is that you'll have great difficulty recovering the investment you made at the beginning because that investment, the cost of that investment has increased. Absolutely nuts. Talking about nuts, the Birmingham bin strike is still on. Yeah, that's right. Rat-infested bin areas continue to accumulate rubbish in Birmingham. The Labour government, who denounced the same thing happening in Glasgow and didn't applaud its early resolution, are quite content to let the poor folks of Birmingham dwell in filth and detritus. Very sad. Anyway, on a much more positive note, let me introduce again Paul Kavanagh, wee ginger Doug. Paul, welcome. How are you?
No bad. Sore and stiff and crippled, but that's normal for me.
What do you make of all the news that come out of the United States?
Well, I never knew that. I never had cheese smuggling was going to be a thing on my 2025 bingo card.
But who knows? It might turn out to be more lucrative than drugs. You never
know.
You might have gangs of cheese smugglers.
The next thing is Keir Starmer will be talking about smashing the cheese smuggling gangs.
I assume it operates in the opposite direction too. You can't take your Caerphilly across to Brussels or
I have no idea. I have no idea.
or Alicante or wherever. Who knows? Or Cadiz. Mm. Anyway, let's look at something which is happening right now. What's your take on these more recent opinion polls, Paul?
Well, it's very heartening. It is very heartening. Having a majority of 12% for 11 or 12% for independence is very, very positive indeed, considering we've been in a kind of a stasis period for such a long time.
Yeah,
And I think people are beginning to wake up to the reality that there will never be any meaningful change or redistribution of wealth or a fair chance for ordinary working people within the United Kingdom. Because even when Labour Party, and this is now the second time in the past 20 years that the Labour Party's had a landslide majority in the Commons, nothing changes, nothing happens. You know, there's still not, was it? I believe it was Labour Party policy since 1910 to abolish the House of Lords. Still
yeah,
not happening. 110 years later, it's never going to happen.
yeah. In fact, in the last week or so, they've been stuffing it with more layabouts,
Yeah,
malcontents, and
including
nilly
my nemesis, Margaret Curran.
crying out loud. I mean, honestly, in what universe would you want to make people like that lawmakers beyond the reach of the electorate? I mean, it's just bizarre.
Well, it just kind of shows it. In any other country, it would be called corruption,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's what it is. It's like
yeah.
giving your pals power. There's no political accountability for it. But no, I'm very heartened by it, and it's. I always kind of thought that, to be honest, that it would be a Labour government that would usher in, make independence the settled will of the people of Scotland,
Mm,
because you expect the Tories to be bastards.
yeah,
That's kind of priced in with a Tory government, you know. But people mistakenly think that Labour's supposed to be the good guys. They're supposed to be the
yeah,
better ones.
yeah.
And yet they consistently, and Keir Starmer is now further right than John Major was in the late 1990s.
Mm.
You know, the modern Labour Party is now further to the right than the Tory Party was in the 1990s.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Because Starmer is espousing positions that John Major referred to as the bastards.
Yeah,
If you remember, he referred to the people in his party that supported Brexit.
yeah,
Keir Starmer is backing an extreme form of that. And you might have thought that with Trump blowing up the world economy and imposing tariffs on everything, that this would be the ideal time for the United Kingdom to, at the very least, rejoin the single market,
exactly.
the customs union, you know, because Starmer has got ideal political cover for it. You
Mm,
can say, oh, look how things have changed. We now have to do this.
yeah,
And moreover, there is solid public support for it across the
yeah.
UK as a whole. But he's still refusing to do it because he's terrified of the right wing media, the right wing press.
Well, I suppose his attitude is, at least in part, formed by the fact that they helped get him where he is.
Well, exactly. He's terrified of losing votes to Nigel Farage.
Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, it's the Labour. Well, of course, as you say, the opinion polls. I mean, you're right. It is striking because in the past, opinion polls have been as positive as this, but they've always been predicated upon a current Tory government. Here we have a Labour government, and now we've got double-digit
Yeah.
positive. I mean, that's novel. That's never happened before, if I
Well,
recall.
I did. I'm not going to say I told you so, but I told you so. Before Starmer was elected, I said that this Labour government was going to become unpopular very quickly.
Yeah,
But I didn't realise just how unpopular and just how quickly it was going to happen. It seems as though they have deliberately set out to alienate every single traditional Labour supporting constituency.
yeah,
every single traditionally Labour voting bloc in the population, they've set out to alienate. And it really is staggering just how bad Keir Starmer is at politics. And it's not going to...
What do you put that down to? I mean, you look at people like Jeremy Corbyn, and they've been through the mill. It's been hard for guys like that. But somehow it steeled them. It made them resilient. The impression I get from Starmer is, to quote that old adage from Churchill, resolved to be irresolute.
I think Starmer's just an opportunist. I don't think Starmer actually has any political beliefs other than he wants power.
Yeah.
And I think he is prepared to say or do whatever it takes to get him that. He's not...
and I think that's my point. He's not anchored.
Exactly.
And the trouble is, if you don't have a sense of morality that anchors you, a set of values.
Compass, as Gordon Brown put it.
Yeah. You just don't. All that happens is that the first buffet, or even the merest zephyr, is likely to push you off in the wrong direction, or cause you to vacillate and lose your balance. And that's the impression I get all the time, is somebody who's frantically, like some guy in a treadmill, just running very hard just to stand still.
He does remind me of Gordon Brown in one important way, though, that Gordon Brown spent almost all of the Blair administration plotting and scheming about how to get in power. Yeah. And then once he got into power, it was revealed that he had no real idea what to do with it. And I think Keir Starmer's exactly the same.
Yeah.
He plotted and schemed to get himself into power, but now he's in power, he really doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I think he is the prisoner of the right-wing Labour, what's it called? That Labour think tank that Morgan McSweeney used to run.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, they've contrived to put him there. I mean, it's almost like the old cliche, he's in office, but he's
Labour
not
together. I think he's a prisoner of Labour together.
Yeah, yeah.
And apparently, Morgan Sweeney is wanting to create what he calls hard Labour, which apparently involves a diet of bread and water for disabled people.
Yeah. What do you think of how the Labour Party has treated disabled people?
Well, as a disabled person, I'm beyond disgusted by it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now on, because I don't know if people are familiar with it, but I should maybe quickly explain it. The main benefit for disabled people in the United Kingdom as a whole is personal independence payment.
Yeah.
And in Scotland, that has now been devolved. And in Scotland, it's been replaced with adult disability payment.
Yeah.
PIP, or personal independence payment, is not an out-of-work benefit. It is a benefit for disabled people to help with the additional costs of disability. I mean, I know that myself ever since I became disabled. Everything's hard work, everything's more expensive, everything's more exhausting. I have to have a deep hot bath every night. Otherwise, I get muscle cramp and back problems with circulation, because the muscles on the left-hand side of my body don't work properly anymore. So that means I've got higher fuel bills than I would have had, because I have to have a big hot bath. So that's just, I can't drive anymore. So if I want to go anywhere, I have to get a taxi, because I can't use public transport easily. So all these things are additional costs that come with being disabled, and PIP is supposed to help you with that. And it's not an out-of-work benefit. A lot of disabled people use PIP to help them stay in work.
Yeah.
So cutting PIP is not going to help disabled people get into work. It's just going to make the lives of disabled people even more miserable. And they're already exhausting and hard work as it is. That was the biggest thing that I found out becoming disabled, is that everything is so much hard work, so much harder now, it's so much longer. I used to be able to batter out 1,000 words in half an hour if I knew what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Now it takes me a couple of hours to do it, because I lost the use of my left hand. and I was left-handed. So I had to learn how to type one-handed with my non-dominant hand.
Yeah.
And I also have a problem that's called visual agnosia, which is why I can't drive anymore, even with an adapted car. That I don't really, I see okay, but my brain doesn't process visual information from the
Yeah.
left-hand side of my visual field properly.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly pressing the wrong key on the left-hand side of the keyboard. So all these things, just everything's slow, everything's exhausting. You
And
know,
what happens when you do that? Do you have to go back over what you've just written?
I have to correct it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have to correct it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm aware that I do it and I try and pay attention to it, but it
But
happens all the time.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to do that because if you're busy thinking about what you're going to be saying next,
No, exactly.
the notion of having to stop and go back.
So it's tiring. It mentally drains
Yeah.
you. I mean,
Yeah.
before I had the stroke, I used to put a new blog article up every single day. And now I can't do that because I just don't have the mental capacity, the mental or physical capacity for it.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, it's hard work.
Yeah.
And it's not going to become any easier because Keir Starmer has decided that he's going to cut disability benefits. You know, I am so glad that I'm now under the Scottish system, which everybody tells me is a lot more humane, because I'm due a reassessment. I'm actually having it later this month. And if it was being done under the old system in PIP, I would be dreading it. I'm still dreading it, but I've heard a lot more positive things about the Scottish system, that it's a lot more humane and medically based than PIP was. I'll give you an example of how bad PIP is. I can't hold a pen. I can't physically write. With PIP, you had to fill in a 40-page form on paper.
Whew.
There's no option to fill it in online. Like I said, I can't hold a pen. So I would have to get myself to an advice centre in order for this form to be filled in, because I physically can't do it myself. And because I've got mobility issues, it's a lot harder for me to get there. You know, and none of these things are going to become any easier because Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are cutting disability benefits. They're just going to be worse.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly galling because they started off during the election saying there would be no austerity.
Exactly.
Now we've got all sorts of austerity coming out of
And now
every
we've got
corner.
we've got Anna Sarwar claiming, oh no, it's not austerity because government spending is going up. And that is such bollocks, because all the way through the years of the Conservative government, from 2010 right through to the end of the Conservative government spending went up. Of course it goes up. It goes up because the population goes up. It goes up because of inflation. It goes up for all these things. So saying that government spending is going up, therefore there's no austerity, is a lie. And that's what Anna Sarwar is trying to say.
Well, he's relying on the fact that people can't do basic arithmetic, and
Exactly.
there'll be a lot of people in that category, but there's a lot of people who are just definitely not. They judge by their own personal experiences. And
Well, here's another example of a spectacularly bad politician. I mean, he's a classic example of a nepo baby. That one. He only got into politics because of who his dad is, and in that respect, he's got an awful lot in common with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Another nepo baby.
Yeah.
But I think Anna Sarwar is going to be staying in place until after the next Scottish elections, because he's going to carry the can for the inevitable defeat of the Labour Party in Scotland.
Yeah, nobody wants to pick up that poison chalice, I expect.
Yeah.
Right now it'll be getting passed around the boardroom table and everyone saying, "Oh, I don't want to touch it. No, leave it there. Leave it there."
But at the moment, it's looking as though, and it's just a few months ago, about this time last year, the Labour Party was strutting around the corridors of Holyrood like they owned the place. And Anna Sarwar was measuring up the curtains in Butte House. And the most recent opinion poll says that they're going to lose half their seats, just about.
Yeah. They're going to come third, aren't they?
Yeah, behind it. Well, they already were third.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, just dreadful. But I'll tell you what I find perplexing is the Scottish government hasn't done a lot really to merit this huge increase in popularity. It seems to be based primarily upon people's loathing for what Labour is doing, rather than any great
I
fondness
don't
for it.
think that I don't think the SNP has particularly increased a great deal in the opinion polls. It's that Labour has collapsed.
Yeah,
I mean, quite a lot of people who said that they were going to vote Labour, who previously voted Labour, now say they're going to vote SNP
yeah.
because who's the alternative, really?
Well, there isn't much of an alternative. I mean, we've had lots of people on the programme in recent months, and they're very concerned about the somewhat supine approach that the Scottish Government takes, particularly in its relationships with Westminster. And as Westminster says, we're going to do the following frightful thing. And they say, that's appalling, full stop, end of story, let's move on. And people are thinking, well, hold on a second. Surely you can do more than just say it's appalling.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? And I think Leslie Riddoch describes it as a creature in a cage, quite happy to run about moving things around in the cage, and without even shaking at the bars and being very complacent about where they are. And by the way, we invited John Swinney on the show. He can't make it, but hopefully one of his ministers can step in for him, and he can come next Wednesday and tell me that I'm completely wrong here, and I'd be happy to engage with him. But
Well, I don't know if you saw it, but Neil Asherson wrote an article in the National a few weeks ago, and he said really the way to break the logjam on independence is for the Scottish Government to adopt what he called a policy of institutional disobedience.
yes, I would agree with that.
I think it's a really good idea, and I'm hoping that that's what the next Scottish Government, after the Scottish election in 2026, will do.
Yeah.
Because Westminster will again try and deny the will of the people of Scotland if we vote yet again for a parliament with a large pro-independence majority.
Yeah. I mean, things are not going to change simply saying.
And if Westminster continues to deny that, then democracy in Scotland is rendered meaningless.
Exactly. And simply to say I'm appalled and you shouldn't have done it.
And under those circumstances, you cannot continue to pretend that everything is normal, because it's not normal.
And people see that. So I suspect they'll be voting SNP because they're saying, hopefully one of these days you'll find a backbone and you'll start to face these guys down.
Well, at the moment, the SNP and the Greens are the only two Scottish pro-independence political parties which have a proven track record in getting people elected.
Well, let's see what happens. One of the discussions we had about getting the independence community together was about the SNP's idea of having a constitutional convention. And we discussed this with Stephen Flynn, and he said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's about 9 months ago. And I said, we'd like to interview the person who's setting it up in the government. And there's been a sort of silence since then. We've never heard from Stephen. We've never heard from anyone else. We don't know if the convention is going to happen. SNP members appear to know little or nothing about it. And at the same time, we're busy, it seems to me anyway, just working within this cage and trying not to frighten the horses. I think you have to frighten the horses. I think Asher's right.
I do think you don't win national independence by being cautious.
No, exactly.
You have to take the bull by the horns.
What would you suggest the Scottish Government does when it's re-elected next year?
Well, like I said, I was very impressed by that article that Neil Asherson wrote about institutional disobedience.
What did he suggest in particular might be?
What he said was that if you want to be independent, you should act as though you already are.
Yes, I agree with that.
And that's actually a lesson that I learned in the gay rights campaign back in the 1980s, where what we used to say was, if you want to be equal, act as though you already are.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. And that's what we did. And that's how we got legal equality.
Yeah.
And I think if the Scottish Government wants to achieve independence, it should act as though it already is. Yeah. And that will mean precipitating a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
But there's no other way to do it. But like I said earlier, you can't act as though everything is normal when the Westminster Government is denying the democratic will of the Scottish people, because that renders elections in Scotland meaningless. What's the point of having elections in Scotland if Westminster is only going to allow us to vote for things that Westminster has approved of?
Exactly. Yeah, and do you think John Swinney is the man to bring this constitutional resistance about? Do you think he's the man to do that?
Well, I think ultimately, no one is going to be an SNP leader forever. And I don't. John Swinney will definitely lead the SNP into the next Scottish elections. But I have high hopes for Stephen Flynn. I do think that we need a new generation of leaders.
Yeah.
And people like Stephen Flynn, who basically he's kind of too young to remember a time when Scotland wasn't self-governed, when Scotland didn't have a parliament.
Yeah.
I think he was born in the late 1980s. I'm not sure. So, I mean, not like old farts like you or me, who can remember campaigning for a Scottish Parliament, for a Scottish Assembly, as we used to call it.
I know, and we would have been happy to have accepted it as a Scottish Assembly.
Yeah.
But your aspirations change over time, and I think when I look at the younger generation of Scots, and you look at the opinion polls, I mean, they're completely sold on the idea.
It's a massive majority in favour of it.
It's people over 60 that are the problem. I mean, they're the people who are wedded to the union.
Every time you point that out, you get someone saying that I'm 85 and I've been an independent supporter all my life, and that's true. That's true. There are lots of people who are older.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm getting older now as well. I'm bald and white haired. But there are plenty older people who support Scottish independence. My mother, who is 83, has supported Scottish independence nearly all her life.
Yeah.
But what it means is older people are statistically more likely to oppose independence.
Now, how much do you think that's down to the media that they consume?
No, it's more than that. I think it's because older people were brought up in a Scotland where there were lots and lots of institutions which fostered a sense of Britishness.
Yeah.
There was all these nationalised industries: British coal, British steel, British gas, British telecom, all of which were publicly owned, and people had a sense that they had a stake in them. Because they were all publicly owned.
Mm-hmm.
Men who are in their 80s now all did national service.
Yeah.
All these things fostered a sense of a British identity in the older generation. And also there was still the lingering sense of the British Empire and Britain being a global force, a global power, which only really began to dissipate, in relatively recent times, the realization that Britain is just a kind of a medium-sized European state.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so that's what they were brought up with, and that's what their mindset was. And they honestly thought that Scotland was too small and insignificant to become independent.
Yeah.
But I think that is changing with younger generations.
I think too, and again, I think my sense is that the sense of Britishness is reinforced by the media, and a lot of young people don't consume the media that you and I consume.
Yeah, well, I mean, nowadays the only institutions which still are like British really are the BBC, which is increasingly discredited, the armed forces, and the royal family, which is totally discredited, at least in Scotland.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the stats for the sort of Britishness, I mean, they're pretty striking, I have to say. Only 41% of young people today are proud to be British, and just 15% believe that the country is united. Almost half, 48% of those between 18 and 27 thought that Britain was racist, far more than the proportion who thought it was not. 50% believe the UK is stuck in the past, and only 11% would fight for Britain. And 41% say under no circumstances at all would they take up arms for their country. Now, these are striking statistics. Yeah. And this is a poll in the Times. I mean, it's just, it suggests that the media somehow is purveying a
Well,
sense of
there's
Britishness that
also
no
an
longer
increasing in
is based
Scotland.
on
There's
reality.
an increasing proportion of people identify primarily or solely as Scottish,
Yes, that's true. That's
whereas those who
absolutely true.
identify primarily or even equally as British is declining rapidly.
Yeah, yeah. I think you pointed that out in your piece in the National, and also on your social media. The youngest age range, 16 to 29, 67% back yes against 22% for no, and the oldest group, which is 75 and up, 75% voted
Yeah.
no, and 33% wanted to have independence. So,
And
and
that's
as you
still a
also
significant
pointed out,
number of older people. That's a third of older people want independence.
exactly, and you pointed out that the weighting is a big issue because
Yes.
approximately, well, over 500,000 people have died in Scotland since 2014.
Yep.
So if you use the 2014 referendum as a weighting, then you get the wrong answers. You garbage in,
Well,
garbage out.
I think you should talk. Weighting is a perfectly valid statistical measure that polling companies use in order to ensure that their sample is reflective of the wider population. So, for example, if 51% of the population is female and a polling company only has 45% female respondents,
Yeah,
then use weighting to increase the weight of that 45% female sample in order to make it reflective of the population as a whole.
yeah,
But what polling companies have been doing is weighting results in Scotland according to the results of the 2014 independence referendum. And in order to make sure they have an equal number, and the people in the sample are 55% voted no in 2014 versus 45% voted yes in 2014. And that was perfectly valid and sensible in the months after the independence referendum. It was a perfectly acceptable thing to do in order to make sure they were getting a statistically representative sample of the population. But as
yeah,
I pointed out, between 50 and 60,000 people die every year in Scotland.
yeah,
And human mortality being what it is, those are mostly members of the oldest generations, who are, as we all know, statistically more likely to oppose independence.
yeah,
And they are being replaced in the 500, approximately 550,000 people, members of the 2014 electorate, have now died. And they have been replaced in the electorate by people from younger age groups, who are proportionately, statistically, more likely to support independence.
yeah,
When a polling company weights its sample according to the 2014 referendum, and YouGov always does this, what they're doing is they are undoing all the demographic changes that have taken place in Scotland since 2014 and wrenching Scotland back to a demographic position that doesn't actually exist anymore. And I think that I don't think it's not a conspiracy that they do that. It's inertia. And because of
yeah,
the media imbalance in Scotland, where we've only got one national newspaper which supports independence, and 38 daily and weekly newspapers which don't support Scottish independence. So opinion polls in Scotland are overwhelmingly commissioned by organisations and publications which do not support Scottish independence. So they are not going to complain to a polling company and say, "Oh, wait a minute, your methodological methods, your methodology is artificially inflating the result for no."
yeah,
Because that's what they want. They want a result for no. And that's why we're in the position that we are in now. And it's very noticeable that opinion polling companies that don't wait for 2014 habitually show higher results for yes than the ones that do. It's a very marked difference.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think we're now at the point 11 years out where 14% of the population has passed away. 14% of the electorate in 2014 has passed away. That I
yeah,
think we're now at the point where if a polling company weights its sample, but according to the results of the 2014 referendum, we can discount it.
Yeah.
Because it's meaningless.
Yeah. I want to take a couple of questions now, Paul, if you don't mind. People are asking what you think of voting SNP 1 and 2 at the next Holyrood election. Are you for that or opposed to that?
Well, I would say that the only time that the SNP won a majority in Holyrood, it was Alex Salmond in 2011, and it was vote SNP 1 and vote SNP 2 that won it. And I think it's a kind of a mugs game to try and game the electoral system, because as we saw from 2021, there was actually a majority, a very slight majority of, I think it was just slightly over 50% of people voted for either the SNP, the Greens, or Alba, and that was discounted. So suppose we got a massive pro-independence majority in Holyrood on, say, 48% of the total vote for pro-independence parties. Westminster's going to completely ignore that.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to concentrate on getting a majority vote for pro-independence parties. So whatever your party of choice is, that's the way to do it. And then we will be guaranteed to have a pro-independence majority in Holyrood. But I think it's a bit of a waste of time.
How do you feel about making it a plebiscite and saying to people categorically, not only are you voting for an independence party, but your vote will be regarded as a vote for independence?
I've always been in favour of that. Ever since it was clear that we're not going to get another independence referendum. And no British Prime Minister is going to agree to a Scottish independence referendum when there is a snowball's chance that there's going to be a yes vote. And we're now at the point where it is statistically probable that there's going to be a yes vote. In fact, I'm convinced that if there's another referendum, there will be a yes vote. And no British Prime Minister is going to agree to that. They're not going to facilitate that.
Yeah.
So that means that the only way that we're going to get an independence vote is if we do it ourselves. And that means turning a vote, an election in Scotland, into a de facto referendum. And I've been arguing that for quite a long time.
And if that were to happen, do you think that the Scottish SNP MP should take their seats at Westminster?
Well, I think that's part of what, going back to what Neil Asherson said about institutional disobedience. I think if we have a strong cohort of SNP MPs, and realistically, it's only the SNP that's going to get returned to Westminster.
Yeah.
If we have a strong cohort of SNP MPs at Westminster, they should use every arcane and obscure rule in the Westminster book to disrupt the workings of the Westminster Parliament as much as possible. And I think that would be far more productive than simply not attending. I think you can throw a spanner in the works of Westminster and make it almost impossible for Westminster to conduct its business. And then they can't ignore you.
Don't you think that looks to some people like ambivalence? You want your cake and eat it. Using the old shibboleth about,
it's about getting leverage. Sinn Féin has had a policy of not participating in Westminster parliaments for many, many decades.
Exactly. And how has that helped them?
It hasn't helped them at all. They've been ignored. I think what you need, and that's what would happen to the SNP if the SNP said, no, we're not going to participate in Westminster. I think the SNP should participate in Westminster, but they should participate in a way that advances the cause of Scottish independence. And that's by being really, really annoying.
That inevitably will mean that they're putting the interests of constituents second. Because the way you achieve things at Westminster, as you know, is kowtowing and pleading and begging the powers that be to throw a few scraps towards your constituents.
Well, the argument is that they are already, if you're elected if you're elected on a platform of getting Scottish independence, which we can assume would be the platform for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that's the platform for the next Westminster general election. That is, we vote for us as a vote for independence. Then they would be ignoring the wishes of their constituents if they don't act in a way to facilitate Scottish independence, because that's what they've been elected to do.
Don't you think that you made a remark earlier about the number of publications that are opposed to independence, and of course they're well funded, even the ones that don't make much money from their Scottish readers, I mean, and you can't overlook the BBC in all of this. What is your opinion of BBC Scotland?
Oh God, don't start me. I don't know if you remember way back, but I was one of the people that was involved with Newsnet Scotland at the very beginning of this Scottish digital independence news thing. And I am very proud, and I want it put on my gravestone when I finally die, that Ken McQuarrie, who was then director of BBC Scotland, referred to me and my colleagues on Newsnet Scotland as those bastards from Newsnet.
Well, you know something.
I wear that as a badge of pride.
It strikes me that nobody in BBC Scotland would say that now. They would look at the SNP and the Scottish government and regard it as supine and look at it and say, well, these guys are never going to give us a problem. Not like Newsnet Scotland. Don't you think?
I think as a government of Scotland, they can't ignore the BBC, you know, and I think it's very difficult for them.
But if we're talking about resisting the
yes, I know, but I think it's very difficult.
Why doesn't the Scottish government?
I think it's very difficult politically for a government to criticise a news organisation.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
even when that criticism is very well justified, as it certainly is in the case of BBC Scotland.
Well, I mean, surely it's quite legitimate to say to a broadcaster, "I have lost confidence in your impartiality, and I will not in future cooperate with you until things change." A Westminster government would do that like that, snapping their fingers. They wouldn't hesitate to do it. In fact, they would actually replace the whole board and make it more amenable to their interests. But since we can't do that with BBC Scotland because they don't report to the Scottish people.
Well, what they should do then is just, issue a statement saying we're not going to give you an interview because.
Yes.
But
and just say
it's very, very noticeable with BBC Scotland that for example, back in 2023 when Hamza Yousaf was the health secretary, and there was strikes in the NHS all over the UK and the NHS, and he managed to negotiate a settlement with doctors so that Scotland was the only part of the UK where there was no strike from NHS staff. And BBC Scotland had been obviously building up for months, for weeks, about, there's going to be strikes in NHS Scotland and they were going to go to town on it because it would have been, SNP bad orgasms for the BBC. And then when he negotiated a settlement and there wasn't going to be a strike, it was covered in 14 seconds a time. 14 seconds.
But this is my point. If somebody says to you, right, I am not impartial, I am bigoted, I am prejudiced, why would you cooperate with them?
But they don't admit to it. That's the problem.
That's you could put that to one side. Bullies don't admit to being bullies. What they do is they just keep bullying. And the only way you can put a stop to it is to say, I'm not going to cooperate in this, because when I cooperate with it, I'm acceding to your position as a bully. Don't do it. Just say, if you want government information, right, then you're finished as far as I'm concerned. I can't trust you. And of course, you could argue, well, John, that applies to all the media. Well, maybe it does. But you work out a strategy. And then what you do prior to that is set up your own broadcasting system online. You don't have to worry about reserve powers. You've got people like you and others who could, I'm sure, gainfully assist any government in that regard. You don't have to. There's all sorts of media available to you now that wasn't the case back in, say, 2014. I mean, I'm reading a book just now on somebody who joined Facebook, and they were amazed that they could have governments elected. They were amazed that Trump was able to capitalize upon his Facebook presence to get elected first time round, because they had no idea how powerful it was. This is despite the fact they had 1 billion users. So, this is where the next election will be
I think
fought.
that's.
It'll be fought
I
on
think.
social
I think
media.
it's also. I think there needs to be more use of social media
Yeah,
by the Scottish Government and by their independence campaign, because younger people who do support independence, as you
precisely.
pointed out, are less likely to. They don't read newspapers. They don't watch television.
Yeah,
And they have to be motivated to turn out and vote.
that's the key. So you have a TikTok organization, you have a Facebook organization, you have a Twitter organization, you have elements that the Scottish Government can put together. It has the ability to finance this in a way that the rest of us just couldn't even begin to think about.
That's what they would have to do before they can cut out the BBC. They would
Of
have
course,
to build alternative communication
yeah.
networks before
And,
they could
and you
say
say
to
to
the
people,
BBC, "We're
if
not
you want
cooperating."
news about the Scottish Government, go to TikTok, go to Twitter, go to Facebook, whatever, and you'll find it all there. And you can produce it and you can make it glossy and all the rest of that good stuff. Because after all, what is BBC Scotland doing? I mean, it's just taking stuff from elsewhere, gets a few toothy figures in front of a camera,
Well,
trotting out a unionist line that it developed 6 months ago. I
its
mean,
viewing figures are plummeting anyway.
oh, of course they are. So there's an ideal opportunity now to replace it with something which is, I mean, dare I say it, more impartial, because
Right.
anything would be more impartial.
Leslie Riddoch actually pointed that out. She was, I mean, as you may know, people, I don't know if people what read know. I used to live in Spain.
Hmm.
I lived in Spain for 15 years. I'm fluent in Spanish. I speak quite good Catalan as well because I lived in a bilingual province.
Yeah,
And when there was all the stuff going on about the Catalan independence referendums and the Catalan campaign, and BBC Scotland actually approached Leslie Riddoch to interview her about it. And she said to them, "Well, why don't you interview Paul Kavanagh?
yeah,
He speaks the language." And of course, they never get in touch with me because I'm one of those bastards from Usenet.
absolutely. You're a marked man.
Aye.
There needs to be more marked men and more marked women. That's the issue. And it seems to be it's not beyond the wit of man or woman to put together some sort of consolidated social media presence that enables people to find out what the Scottish Government is doing and avoid going through the channels which are hugely corrosive.
But when BBC Scotland started their BBC Scotland channel and their debate night, I happened to mention in an article in the National that I'm quite well connected with the broader independence movement, and I didn't know a single person. This was back in 2016, I think it was, and I didn't know a single person in the broader independence movement who'd been invited to participate.
Of course not.
And I got a text from them asking me if I could go on the show that night. And I received it actually in Boston Airport in America because I was on my way to visit the man who's now my husband. Although I won't be going to America anytime soon. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. Well, the impact of social media should not be underestimated. I actually was in Vegas a couple of 3 years ago now, and I was waiting in the line for immigration. And this guy came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Hi, John." I didn't know him from Adam. I said, "Yeah, hello, how are you?" Obviously, he was from Scotland. He said, "I like your show. I mean, I don't agree with any of that crap, but I have to say I like your show." And I thought, hold on a second. I'm in an American airport, and here's a guy who says he's seen the TNT show. And it wasn't a sort of favourable comment. He said, "I just don't agree with much of what you say." And I thought, this is extraordinary. You've got a global reach here. I mean, it's just incredible. And when I think of BBC Scotland versus that potential, I think, how come nobody's ever capitalised upon that? Because it's so obvious. And that's me. I mean, come on, people like you who are able to generate really quality material. I mean, you'd have to say, in any other country in the world, say Catalonia, the channels would be beating a path to your door
Yeah,
because
but
we
I'm
say here.
just a guy.
Seriously, I mean, they would, because I mean, it's weird, and we because we've sort of grown up with it a bit, we sort of expect it and we make allowances for it, but we shouldn't. We should not, in the same way that any independence movement shouldn't accommodate. Because my big worry is if once you start to accommodate, maybe as Neil Asherson was suggesting, you end up in the wrong place for you. And that's not good. It's not good. And it's not good for the cause that you're espousing as well. So I'm not a great believer in accommodation. I think it's you're accepting somebody else's agenda, and I don't feel comfortable with that because it suggests that you haven't thought it through for yourself. But it's just a personal view. People are asking how you feel about a people's or a constitutional assembly between now and the Holyrood elections, Paul. What's your take on that?
I think anything that highlights the cause of independence and drives it to the top of to give it public attention is a good thing.
Yeah.
Especially considering the media landscape that we've got in Scotland. I think things have to be done. And also, I think it needs to be done in such a way as to Scottish independence should not be a party political campaign.
Yeah.
Because independence, I had during the independence referendum campaign in 2014, I went to a debate and God, what's his name now? I've forgotten his name, but a former Labour MSP was the guy speaking for the No campaign. And honestly, that was an hour of my life that I'll never get back again because he just droned on and on and on about SNP housing policy for an hour.
Yeah.
And at the end of the debate, I said to him, I'm really angry that you've wasted all our time.
Yeah.
Because all you've done is try and score cheap party political points about a devolved government.
Yeah.
I says, I wanted you to explain to me why you think that Scotland is better off as a part of the United Kingdom versus Scottish independence.
Yeah.
Do you not think that in an independent Scotland, your party could be the party of government? This is not a party political issue. This is about national independence. And later he referred to me as an SNP plant. Anyway. And just for the record, I have never been a member of the SNP. I was actually a member of a political party once, many, many years ago, for 2 months. I joined the Socialist Workers' Party.
Is that right?
I used to be a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, but the only reason I joined was because I fancied their gay organiser for the West of Scotland. And I think I was 19 at the time. I still had hair,
we should all be excused our 19-year-old indiscretions.
And I wanted to get off with them, and of course I failed dismally. And then a couple of months later, I got a letter from them telling me that I'd been purged from the party for bourgeois nationalism.
Oh, there you are.
Because I wanted a Scottish Republic.
It
wasn't really for bourgeois nationalism. It was for calling the West of Scotland organiser a middle-class wanker up to start the revolution in Pollokshaws.
Too accurate, Paul.
And that was the end of my political career.
Talking about political careers, I remember many years ago, prior to the referendum, and it reminds me so much of the present Labour Party in Scotland. The local Labour MP at that time for my area, Kinross, had a public forum, and I said to him, I'm still not clear about your position at Westminster. He said, well, I'll tell you, I can sum it up in one sentence. My job is to lower expectations. That's what he said, Paul.
Who was this?
A guy called, I think his name was McNeil. He lived in Edinburgh, but he represented, it must have been a long time ago that Labour had an MP for Kinross. Right. But I think it was McNeil. And that's what he said to me. My job is to lower expectations.
Don't you go getting above yourself, Scotland.
Well, it was just pathetic. I mean, I said to myself, this, you can't sustain that argument. I'm sorry. You have a fairly docile bunch of people in the room at the time, but they were not as appalled as I was, because I thought this is just outrageous. A political leader saying what you should do is lower your sights. But that's exactly what the Labour Party in Scotland is doing at this very precise moment. It's encouraging people to lower their expectations.
And that's what gets me. One of the things that gets me angry is that, that opponents of independence would have us believe that this is as good as it can get.
Yeah, precisely.
And that is, you should be ashamed of yourself if you say that.
Yeah.
Scotland is one of the richest countries in the world.
Yeah.
And this is the best that we can do? I think not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I was appalled then, I'm appalled now, and I'm seeing the same traits.
Aye, we're just turning into angry old men shouting at clouds.
Well, maybe we are, but something, and I'd love to have some on the show. I'd like to have some young men and some young women on the show with the same sort of passion, because I think it's a great tribute. That you can call us grumpy old men if you like. That's a fair description. At the same time, you can say they've still got some cojones, even at that age. And if you can say that, it's not such a terribly damning thing. Honestly, it really isn't.
Well, I'm not going to stop anyway. Even a stroke isn't going to shut me up.
Well, that's to your great credit.
I've some people that wish they'd shut me up.
No, you'll never be shut up on this show, I can tell you categorically, Paul. We've only got a couple of 3 minutes left. Are there any closing thoughts you would like to leave with our audience, some of whom are in a pub in Aviemore? Some people are driving just now.
Well, as Scotland is going to become independent, I am convinced of that. It will happen because the demographics of it are leading inexorably that way. So Scotland will become an independent country. It's just we need to keep the faith and we will get there.
Yeah. And what concrete steps would you like to see the Scottish government taking over the next couple of years?
Well, I would like to see more focus on independence. I would like to see more standing up to Westminster and directly challenging them and saying, no, we're not going to do that.
Give me an example of something they could do.
Well, they could just say, for example, we're going to set up a Scottish broadcaster.
Yeah.
We're going to do that. We're going to set up a Scottish broadcaster. It is ludicrous that we have to ask you for permission for, as we did. Scotland had to get Westminster to pass an act to set up a Gaelic language TV channel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nonsense.
Yeah.
So I think they should do things like that. They should start legislating on things which are out with the legal competence of Holyrood as defined by the Scotland Act and precipitate a constitutional crisis. But they can only do that once they've got a mandate for it, and that's the mandate they should be asking for at the next Scottish elections.
Precisely. Well, we've had a great conversation, Paul. I suspect we could go on as grumpy old men for another couple of hours, but I wouldn't want to impose upon your generosity in joining us tonight. But that's the reality, folks. When you get quality people like Paul on the show, you need to welcome that. And furthermore, I would say that Paul, you've got a fundraiser running just now. I think you're 280 quid light of your target.
Yeah, we're nearly there.
You're almost there. I would encourage everybody to bring that up to the target amount. You can do it. WeGingerDoug.wordpress.com and support Paul and everything he does, because you can gather.
Greatly, it's always appreciated.
It's always appreciated, and also it's always appreciated to support Indie Live, because I have to say we're well short of where Paul is. So if you can do both, I'd be terribly grateful, and I would encourage you to do that, and also to speak to friends and colleagues and family, and put some, however small an amount, into these good works, as they say, because we are here doing our best, and we're competing with a BBC that's probably has a budget of 300 million.
I'm going to, just before we go, I used to do a lot of public speaking, but I've not been doing much since I had the stroke because it's very difficult for me to get about, and I don't have the stamina that I used to have. But I am doing a public talk in Oban for the Yes Group in Oban on the 30th of May.
There you are, folks. 30th of May. What time? Where about?
I don't have the details yet, but it's in Oban on the 30th of May. So I'll publish details on the blog nearer the time.
Look it up, Google it. come and join Paul on the 30th of May in Oban, and you
All
won't
right.
regret it. I can guarantee you. Paul, thank you very much again. Can I say to
My
everyone
pleasure.
watching
Thank you
tonight,
for inviting me.
a great pleasure. Everyone, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and help each other out as best you can.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
to
you very
Paul,
much.
and a big thank you to all of you tonight. Take care. Good night.
All right. All right. Cheers.